Welcome to the Sly Gittens Tech Simplified channel. And in today's video, I'm continuing the series, Women in Technology. I have a special guest with me today. Her name is Mimi Gross, Principal Consultant at Hyer Tech. And today she's going to share her story on how she got into the cybersecurity tech field. So let's get it started right now. Knowledge is king. So Mimi, would you mind sharing with my audience your story and how you got into the information technology field? And additionally, would you share how Hyer Techs help candidates get into startups, specifically in the cybersecurity industry?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, by the way. I guess the story should start with how did I even get into recruiting, which is what we do at Hyer Tech Solutions. There's the IT world, and then there's the cybersecurity. So kind of how do we zero in all the way there? I'll start really quickly. I was in the nonprofit world. A lot of what I did was all about networking people with each other, getting the right people together to make the best things happen, which is my tagline on LinkedIn. And so I've been doing that forever. Now, the nonprofit world has, I would say, a ceiling on kind of being able to really see things happen fast, real things happen fast. So I just started having a craving for real business world. And so I was talking to a friend one day, and she made me crazy. It's like 24 hours a day. I love it. And I was like, what do you do? And she said, I'm a recruiter. And I was like, what's that? Like, no, I'd never even considered it. So, I started exploring with her, potentially joining her. Another friend of mine, I found that a lot of recruiting can be boring. You really have to love what you recruit. So I interned with a friend who had a cybersecurity recruiting firm, really deep on the startups. I couldn't get enough of it. I started reading, all the blogs, everything I could get my hands on about cybersecurity startups, because obviously the bigger cybersecurity companies, I mean, you probably heard, you've heard of them, probably in your regular McAfee, whatever. It doesn't sound that exciting. Mm-hmm. But once you start hearing about the startups, they're like protecting autonomous cars, and they're protecting like the infrastructure, the electrical grid. I mean, it starts to get very exciting, and you start to feel like, wow, this company is like protecting our country and our world. Mm-hmm. And I got addicted to it. Now, the person that I was kind of like interning for just was not, that wasn't their approach. And so I kind of said, well, how about this? Like, you don't want to work with these kind of little tiny baby startups. Why don't I just go on my own, and that's all I'll do? And so that's what I do. I work with cybersecurity startups on building their first customer-facing teams. Okay. And it's very exciting because there's so much human element to it. So what is, customer-facing? There's a lot of that. So there's obviously sales. There's obviously marketing. And then there's one other place, which is where I get a little technical, which is sales engineering. And that's what you do, right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
So that's what we do. And, okay. We could dig in on a couple different fronts there, like what makes it different, working for a startup, recruiting for startups, interviewing with startups. Yeah. And then the other side of it is like, what's so exciting about cybersecurity? Yeah. So I'll leave that to you, where you want me to dig in.
Yeah. So first of all, that was a great story, a great background on how you got in there. One thing I did like to touch on is how you did an internship first to see if this was really for you. And it gave you some hands-on experience on how you could do it better or differently. And then and that's how you got your hair. So that's a really cool story to share on how you, went from working for someone and then start your own business, and now it's focused on this particular area.
I'd love to say something about that, which is that it's always good. Do not be afraid of working for free if you want to try something out. Sorry.
And that's great. No, I'm glad you brought that up. No need to apologize. I think that's something that we need to emphasize is I've done internships. My best position I ever took was right out of college. I did a 4-month internship for the Office of Emergency Management in Brooklyn, being a network engineer, help desk engineer, virtualization engineer, security engineer. And I had all these different exposures for free, right? I was working like 12 hours for free. So part of me is like, My family's like, why are they getting this free labor out of you? But they didn't realize that I got to take what I learned conceptually in college and then actually apply it. And I realized, I didn't like being a network engineer, at least being a network engineer that was focused in the data center. I prefer being frontline with the customers and still having that technical element. So, and that's before I even knew a sales engineer role existed. So that's why like maybe I drew a little bit more to the help desk because it was more people oriented versus the systems oriented. So I think that was really cool, but that helped spearheaded me to get my career jump started into like tech support, then eventually the technical account manager, sales engineering roles, and then like pre-sales technology consultant roles, which is another word for sales engineer. But that's really good to say. But this was a good conversation to change gears for a bit. So my audience is more technical, right? So can we talk about from a macro scale, when you're looking at these different roles for sales engineers, what makes a good sales engineer? What are you seeing when you're hiring for these roles? What's some of the good and what's some of the bad that you're seeing out there?
That's a great question. I mean, it's really a good question. First of all, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that because you're a great sales engineer. Number one, people should know that a sales engineer, that title can be called a number of different things. Solutions architect. What are some of the ones you've heard?
Solution architect, pre-sales consultant, pre-sales specialist, the system engineer, right?
Exactly. So there's all these different titles that would really encapsulate this role. And I think the main difference here is the sales part, which is that it's the kind of ahead of time bringing that customer on. Now, sometimes also when you hear sales engineer and you're a technical person, you think to yourself, I can't do that. Like, I don't want to sell. So here's why it's such a cool job. You are partnered with a salesperson, a real, hard-nosed salesperson. So you get to play this like good cop, bad cop kind of thing, where if you're the sales engineer, you get to be the one to really make the customer, the potential prospect, feel comfortable, feel like they have someone technical to kind of, talk with and challenge in a deep way about the product. And that's why in my mind, I think it's a really cool job from the sales front, because you really get to be the good cop. And then like the salesperson gets to be the one who's like pushing to close, pushing for the PO, all that stuff. And the more you help your salesperson do that, the more they'll just love you. Yeah. And the more you guys will sell together. But your role is kind of good cop. And I that's why whenever I see that, I'm like, it is such a cool job. And on top of that, it pays really well. Yep. So that's kind of my two things on that.
And can I jump in there really quickly?
Yeah.
So one thing I can add on to that is you said it right. So for me, I don't really enjoy forecasting. I don't like doing pipeline creation. I know how to do all those things, but I don't enjoy doing that. I prefer getting into the technology, understanding the problem that's being set forth and what tools that we can leverage, to remediate those problems. So you're right. My sales rep would do all of the relationship building, the number crunching, the forecasting, deal closures, and my job is to set them up, right? So I'm a tool in their tool belt. And the great thing I think I found, I'll give you an example. The other day, we had I work with partners and partners who have customers. So my partner set up an end user call or their customer call for us to do a demo, but my demo lab wasn't working. So I tried to reschedule it, right? But we couldn't reschedule it. So myself and my sales reps had to stay up to like 12 o'clock, like 5 hours to build this out from scratch.
Oh my God.
Right? So we can maintain that relationship. And at the end of the day, the partner and the customer enjoyed the presentation. But again, I created it. I did the demo. I did all of the configuring the solution. And then I positioned it for the requirements that the customer gave us. Then after that was done, my sales rep takes it from there. They bring it across the line. I do the technical win, I like to call it, and they finish it across the line. Sometimes I switch out because I did sales roles in the past. So if my sales rep isn't there, I can close it myself if I needed to, and just help out, and vice versa. I teach them enough so they can have like a level 1 conversation And if it gets deeper, they bring myself or
Sly,
associate
can I ask you something that I
on.
think is really interesting? Do you feel like, so you were up till midnight with these guys, like
Mhm.
creating this thing? Do you like them? Like, I always have this
Yeah,
question. Like, I think like the relationship between your sales engineer and you, like if
yeah,
you love each other, like if it really is like a cop team
yeah.
and you guys are like, just kind of will do anything for each other, don't you think that really enables the sales to
Oh yeah,
just
definitely.
skyrocket?
We tag team, right? We always say we're gonna go to bat for each other, right? So I work with two sales reps,
Wow.
that two direct sales reps, and then extended team of 10 that leverages me for security solutions. And my two main ones, those are my partners. We got to go to war for each other, right? No matter if it's good or bad, we need to have that conversation. So when we're
What
in the
makes the
trenches,
relationship work? Like, what do you think is like the best part of your relationship with these two salespeople?
respect. I think it's
Hmm.
respect. We both respect both of our roles are important, and one isn't over the other. I don't assume because they're not getting into the tech that their job isn't valuable, and they don't assume since they're building the relationship and bringing the customers to me that their job is more important than my job, because without
Cool.
one or the other, it doesn't work. It's not that perfect dance. And people might make the case, why do you need a sales rep if you have a tech person? But if you ever had to be the one to do both of those jobs at once, you could realize it gets cumbersome. And the only person
I'm
that
sure.
you know I think feels the impact is the customer. So yeah, I think respect is the main thing. And also I think we enjoy each other's company. We accept that some areas that we have synergies, and then we accept that we have some areas that I don't agree with him. But we don't use that to, stop our relationship, right? Whether that's political, right? We come up, we have different political views, but we
Oh, that's interesting. Like,
but we
meaning you have a real relationship. So you guys
yeah,
sometimes talk about stuff
we
like
talk
that.
about that, and we got into heated arguments before. It's like a real relationship, right? Because he won't agree with my thought process, I won't agree with his thought process, but at the end of the day, we say we value their thought process because we know, to get to that place, we are made up of different experiences, so we
Hmm.
enjoy people experiences, and we found that we had more commonalities than differences anyway. So the small little differences, we don't let that stop us from having a friendship as well as a business partnership. So I think
Cool. That's really neat. I think that there's probably out there in the sales engineers, salesperson world, there's probably like some amazing stories of like legendary, partners who
yeah,
just kind of like play off each other. And that would be a really cool, it would be probably a really cool study to do, to talk to like a bunch of like couples, sales
yeah,
engineer and salesperson,
and
and just hear what makes a good team.
yeah, you're right. And because when I went to bat for him, staying up to 12 o'clock, he called me after the call and said, "Man, thank you. Most people would have never
Sure.
done that. They would have found some excuse not to show up, or they would try to figure out a half-baked solution, and that was respect earned. And the same thing for him. I needed
That's really
a
neat.
win story. He's better at cultivating and selling the whole entire story, right? So I had him
That's
write something
awesome.
up for me. And he went to bat for me for my justification for my roles. So we talked a lot about sales engineering and the role and who you are and who is Hyer Tech, Solutions. Let's talk about what can my audience do to prepare for these type of interviews. What are you seeing in the candidates who come to these startups who do a good job? What's some of the skill sets they embody? What's some of the way they deliver on that interview, and what stuff that they didn't do well that you think my audience should stay away from?
That's a really good question. I think I could unpack that into two different things. One is I have great suggestions on some interview tips that I think are universal.
Mhm.
And then I think there's a second part of your question, which is what does it take to be successful in a startup? So I have like a set of kind of universal tips that I almost literally cut and paste
Mhm.
and send out ahead of time. And I always preface it by saying, I hope it doesn't seem like I'm being patronizing by saying some of these very basic things.
Mhm.
But what I have found is that people who are generally confident people who are worried about interviews will prepare up to wazoo,
Mhm.
but sometimes you're not preparing smartly. And so you'll like over prepare. And so I've honed it down to a couple different things. One is I say, give yourself a half hour to really study the website. Try to understand it from a customer perspective. That's the best way. If it's a startup, I would also try to take the perspective of you know, an investor. Try to imagine that you're an investor and you're thinking, would I invest in this company? What problem are they solving? How are they doing it? Is that gonna, you know, can I buy that? Can I buy how they're trying to sell it to me just from the website? Because that's really a superficial but very telling way to know a lot about the company. So you're looking at that piece. Then you're actually looking at the tech. And while you look at the tech, what I recommend is write 3 questions down. And these are questions that you imagine you're sitting with somebody and they're telling you about this tech. And you want to think about the most curious sounding questions. So something that's not going to be obvious. If it's going to be obvious on the website from looking at it for, let's say, a half hour, 20 minutes, don't ask that question. You want to ask something that you're pretty sure isn't obvious. And that's going to make you look curious. It's going to make you look interested and intelligent. Now, I say look that way. That sounds like, am I telling you to be fake? No, I mean, you want to get to the point where you yourself, if you can't get to where you're asking a curious question, you might not be that interested in what the company's doing.
Agreed.
So that could be an indication to yourself that you're not very excited by it. So that's something I want to say, which leads me to something to always keep in the back of your mind. And when you're interviewing for a job, you always kind of, the default is you want them to like you. And that's good. But you also want to keep in the back of your mind, do you like them? Do you like the way that they're interviewing you? Do you like the way that they're presenting their product? So number 1 is you're reading the website, you're writing down questions. You may think you'll remember those questions. You will go blank and you will say, and when they say, do you have any questions? Or when you want to throw a question in, you will go blank.
Yeah.
Guaranteed. Maybe not on all 3 of the questions, but always helpful to have it in front of you. And I can't tell you how many people have thanked me afterwards for just saying to them, like, write it down, have it in front of you. So that's one. Watch anything, obviously, any content that's like video content that you can.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing I would say is ask the person who's interviewing you how they got to that company.
Smart.
And, you know, that is a great way to, like, let's say you went to the same college or you play the same sport or you like the same stuff. And that's like obvious. I hope it's obvious. You will always look up the person that you're going to be speaking with on LinkedIn first. So there you have some things to connect with on a personal level. But let's say you just don't have anything to connect with. A great way to get the person interviewing you to be human with you is to ask them how they got there. So that's a tip that I think is a really good one that I give people. Now, if you're going to a sales job, and this can kind of a little bit skim on, let's say you're trying to break into the sales engineering world. If you're trying to break into the sales engineering world, I hope that at some point in your life, you've had a situation where you've had to persuade somebody to do something or sell something. So what I tell salespeople is always have a sales story that shows a challenge and a victory and will show your kind of expertise. It doesn't have to be a sales story. So if you're interviewing for a really technical role, I mean, you could think of any challenge you would have and then always kind of think of it with like a little victory at the end. I've heard people in interviews get asked that question, like, tell me about a difficult situation you had or a deal that you know, didn't get or almost didn't get. And I've heard people tell stories of deals that they didn't get because of some larger outside influence came in and but they worked really hard. I'm telling you right now, like, that's not going to fly. If you're going to share a story, you've got to show that you have the kind of personal initiative to make something happen, to be scrappy, to be creative, to get to where, you know, the task that was put in front of you is done.
Yeah.
So that's just a strange thing that, seems obvious, but like I always say it, and that's the theme of every recommendation I give for interviews, seems obvious, but when I lay it out to them and I send a text that says these things and they can tick that off before the meeting, I think it's really important. They're basic, but really important. The other thing I always say is that if it's a sales role, make sure you don't forget that you are selling. People do forget that they're selling themselves when they're in a sales call. And so the recommendation I always give is just ask yourself, what is the goal? If you were selling something in this call, what are you selling and where do you want to be at the end of the call in the sale? And make sure you're there. But in startup, you're going to wear many hats, you're going to do many things, you're going to learn a lot on the job.
Yep.
However, and I think you really brought this up and it's such a great lesson for everyone to know, just dig in the interview process. What do you need me to be excellent at and efficient with today? And then what are those things that, maybe I'll be able to grow into, but what do you essentially need now? And you're right. Sometimes they won't know. And sometimes they'll be excited by the entire package of what you're bringing to the table. And so they want to make it work and you want to make it work. But right now they need this one thing that just isn't the thing you love to do. Don't do it. Because if there's one thing that they need on a pretty regular basis, even just at the beginning, but it's not what you love. Now that's different than able. It has to be the thing you love to do because you're going to do a heck of a lot of it. That's where I think there's really an interesting differentiation, is make sure it's the thing that not just that you can do, not just that you're good at, but that you love to do. And if that's what they need you to do tomorrow, it's a great fit. If that's not what they need you to do tomorrow, but they like other things about you, ask them exactly how they envision that hole being filled. Because it's not a non-starter. If everybody's prepared, everybody's eyes wide open, anything can work. And that's what I love about startups.
Yeah, I think transparency is key, right? I think it helps you and helps the company. And it's okay to say that, you know what, I like 90% of it, but the 10% that you asked for seems like it's critical. And I don't think that's something I just don't want to do, right? So I think that's going to be a deal breaker, but I do enjoy this company. So if you do have a role with X, Y, and Z, keep me in mind, right? Because then you just formed a partnership, a friendship that can carry on to something different. So, and then also don't let the money hypnotize you too, right? Sometimes you get a nice package, you get a lot of stock options, and everyone hears the stories of if they would have got into Google or Facebook in the beginning, they'd be millionaires. And that thing is enticing. But if you don't love doing it, don't do it, right? Because you're gonna have to, make that. Are you willing to make that sacrifice? And if you don't enjoy doing it, it's gonna make it hard coming every day when you're putting in,
Sly,
that time.
This is, and I think like with joining a startup, I think the most important thing is not just that, you won't enjoy it and you'll be sad, like, kind of like an emotional thing, but you won't have it in you to be successful in that role. Because it demands so much. It's almost not even just like an enjoyment factor. It's like you won't be successful because like your kind of threshold, like you're not tapping into something that I always talk about. People have every person has a latent workaholic tendency. And that tendency will be triggered when it's the right challenge for the right person at the right time. And that kind of workaholic vibe, where you just you're thinking about it when you go to sleep at night, you can't wait to get up and fix the thing that you were working on. That is required if you're going to work for a startup.
And
so that's kind of the key thing. It's not is it going to be worth it for you to put that in? It's if it has to even be a thought,
it's not for you.
It's just not gonna gel. And I think that's the difference I've really seen over time.
I think that separates the good candidates and the great candidates. So we even talked about earlier that one thing that needed to be done at 12. I went in the zone. I got up early, 2 hours before my meeting, and I finished the rest of it, even though I was only operating on 4 hours of sleep. It was fine, and I still performed, but I enjoyed doing it.
It triggered something. It triggered that thing in you that was what you loved, and you didn't even did you feel like you were,
no, it was fun.
Being forced to do something or whatever?
No, not at all, because I've been
Yeah,
building computers and doing this since I was like 7. So for me, it's just another day for me that I do for
that's
free.
certainly
So
very validating. You know that, like,
yes.
I mean, I've seen it in myself. I've seen it in candidates. I've seen it in once people start working, and the best fits are the ones where like what they need to do tomorrow is like the thing that triggers them to just work for, to the limit.
Yep. This was a fantastic interview, but it needs to end right now, right? So how can my audience reach out to you and keep the conversation going?
Thank you so much for offering that. Well, I will say, you know, if you could link to my LinkedIn below, I am super available. Obviously, find times that work for us, but I'm always happy to review a resume. I'm always happy to talk about a career trajectory. I'm always happy to introduce people to others that I think can be mentors. Like Sly just introduced you to somebody who I think
Yep.
can learn a lot from you. I know thousands of people, and I find that the best time to meet people is when you're not looking for a job, you're just really exploring. And I call this investigative networking. I literally coined that. So if you could hashtag that, that would be
Yep.
great. And I found that people are so willing to offer guidance and insight when
Mhm.
you're not like asking for a job.
Correct.
And
Yep.
so I think you really come in a spot of power and, you know, kind of click into people's like desire to help when you're just want to hear their wisdom, and just be open to that. Like be open to hearing people's stories. How did they get into what they're doing? Ultimately, I guarantee you those people may introduce you to a job, but the best time to do it is before you're looking.
Yeah, and you're right. So, without any further ado, Sly Gittens and Mimi Gross are out.
Thanks,
Peace.
Sly. It was awesome. Thanks, guys.